Okay, good morning. My name is Gloria and I'm the Vice Chair of the Education Committee in Nature Society Singapore. So today we have Mr. Sean Yap, who's an entomologist and a PhD student at NUS. And we are very pleased that he can give us a talk on farm living insects in Singapore. So Sean will also tell you more about himself. Okay, over to you, Sean.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sean, and today I'll be talking to you about insects in Singapore. So very quickly going over what I do. So I'm mostly a scientist who works with insect DNA. So most of my time is actually spent in the lab. But before I do all my work in the lab, I actually have to go out into the field to collect insects. So part of this is, most of this is done on MParks permit. So I have to apply for permission from MParks to go into a forest to study our insects. So after I catch them in the field, I bring them back and I study them mainly to look at their DNA and compare them across different species. Yeah, and my main specialty is in beetles. So this is a small collage of different species of beetles that were all found in Singapore. So I'll go into detail on some of them a bit later. But for now, what my job title is actually, so this photo is of me collecting beetles in Sarawak. So this isn't Singapore, but one of the places in Borneo where there's a lot more insect diversity. So someone who studies insects is known as an entomologist. So that's how you spell it, a person who studies or does research on insects. Yeah, but so before we go further, maybe we define a little bit on what an insect is. So what exactly is an insect? So only one creature on this screen is an insect, and that's the one on the top right-hand corner, which is a beetle. So what defines an insect usually are these few features. They usually have three body segments: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, right? They also have one pair of antennae, so two antennae per body. And most species will usually have 4 wings, but all of them have 6 legs, unless a leg has fallen off. Yeah. So if we look a bit at the other creatures that were shown earlier, so this is a centipede. They have 2 antennae, but they have many body segments instead of 3. They have no wings, and they have many legs, way more than 6. So centipedes and millipedes are not insects. And then we look at these 2 creatures here. So spider and a scorpion. They have 2 body segments. The head and the thorax are fused together to form 1 segment. They do not have antennae. They do not have wings either. And instead of 6 legs, they have 8 legs. So then spiders and scorpions are not insects. So now that we've gone over what are not insects, let's take a look at a few examples of what insects actually are. But before that, we will go very briefly into the life cycle of an insect. So you might have learned in school that, for example, a caterpillar turns into a pupa and then turns into an adult butterfly and then lays its eggs that eventually turns into a caterpillar again. So that's the common 4-stage life cycle. There's also the 3-stage life cycle where there's no pupa stage. So not all insects go through a pupa stage. So if we look a bit at different types of insects, usually the older insects, the ones that evolved first, the ones that came out even before the dinosaurs were around, those actually have no pupa stage. And then the more recent insects have the pupa stage. So what's the benefit of having a pupa stage? So if we go back to this, right? If you look at the caterpillar and the butterfly, you realize that they are very specialized for very different functions. So a caterpillar feeds on leaves, whereas a butterfly feeds on the nectar of flowers. So in this case, the larvae and the adult feed on 2 different things, and so they won't compete with each other for the same resources in the same habitat. Yeah, so that allows them to specialize each life stage for the specific purpose. Okay, so then what are some examples of insects that we have in Singapore? We start with one of the oldest groups of insects, which is the dragonflies and damselflies. So dragonflies and damselflies are very pretty. They are often very colorful and nice to look at, but they're also very important for our ecosystem. So one thing I would like to point out in this slide is that many species of dragonflies and damselflies, they're actually different between males and females. So the special term for this is called sexual dimorphism. So it means that males and females look very different. So if you look at the top left-hand corner, there is a red or pink dragonfly. And on the top right-hand corner, there is a yellow one. These two are actually the same species, but the red one is male and the yellow one is female. So in most cases in the insect kingdom, the males are actually the ones that are more vibrant and more attractive because they have to show off and impress with the females. Yeah, a bit like peacocks. Okay, so these are some species that you might see in Singapore. So on the left side, we have the common flashwing. This one is usually seen near water bodies. If you go to like a nature park, for example, if you go to Windsor Nature Park, you might see them. So what's special about this species is that the wings are actually reflective. So under a certain angle of light, they actually shine a nice purple-blue color, right? So these two photos were taken of the same individual, one without flash and one with flash. So the one with flash, you can see the sparkles on the wings. And then on the top right, you have the common parasol. This is a species that you can see in very commonly in shrubby habitats. So usually grassland or next to a longkang, next to a drain, you might see it. And the one on the bottom right is one of the largest species we have in Singapore. It's called the emperor. It's a very nice name. This species sometimes flies into people's houses, but it's quite hard to see out in the wild. Yeah. So dragonflies and damselflies, they are related, but they are actually split into two distinct groups. And how we usually tell them apart is we look at the structure of the head. So if you look at the dragonfly, you realize that their eyes are very, very large. And then they meet at the top of the head. So it looks like it forms one large goggle or one large mask, right? Whereas if you look on the right side, this is a damselfly. The eyes are separate and split into two, and on both sides of the head. And then in the middle part, they do not meet. So that's how you identify a damselfly and a dragonfly. So earlier on, I mentioned why that dragonflies are important for the ecosystem. And why this is because both the nymphs and the adults are carnivorous, and they help to control the populations of other insects. So the nymph stage of the dragonfly actually spends all its time in water, and it only emerges, it comes out onto land when it's about the time to turn into an adult, where it starts to sprout wings and then it can fly around and hunt flying insects. When it's in the water, its main diet consists of other aquatic invertebrates, and they eat a lot of mosquito larvae. Yeah, so if you don't like getting bitten by mosquitoes, dragonflies are good to have around. The nymphs feed on the young mosquitoes, and the adults feed on the adult mosquitoes. So the entire life cycle of the dragonfly is good for us because they all eat mosquitoes. Yeah. So the nymphs of the dragonflies actually have gills that allow them to breathe underwater, and they have this jaw that actually extends outwards like an alien arm that shoots out. So it lies in wait for something like a mosquito larvae or even like small fish and tadpoles sometimes to swim past, and then it'll shoot out that jaw. So if you ever watch like Alien, that kind of movie, that's where the inspiration is. Yeah. So the adult dragonflies don't have this arm jaw. They actually just fly around, and then they have spines on their legs that they use to catch their prey in midair, and then they can even eat while flying. Yeah. Okay, so the next group of insects that we're talking about are the grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. So these groups are all related to each other. Grasshoppers, you can identify them because usually their antennae are a little bit shorter compared to crickets and katydids. If you look at all four pictures on all four species that you see on this screen, their antennae are less than about half the length of the body of the insect. So you can tell that they are grasshoppers. Yeah. So these are all katydids or crickets. And most of them actually have antennae that are longer than the body even, right? So the top two pictures are actually katydids. The one on the top left is a nymph that actually looks like an ant, but is really a katydid. Katydids are also known as bush crickets, so they are more related to crickets than they are to grasshoppers. So a lot of young insects like to mimic ants because this helps to prevent them from being eaten by predators. And then the adult katydid on the right side, which is the one that looks like a leaf, uses its appearance as a camouflage so that predators such as birds may not be able to spot it when they are not looking carefully. Not all of them eat grass or leaves. So the one on the bottom right, the one that's on the rope and has like a blue abdomen, this is a leaf rolling cricket. It's actually one of the more uncommon carnivorous crickets, and they feed on other insects instead. Yep. So how crickets sing or make the chirping noises at night is by vibrating their wings. So their wings actually have like a structure that allows them to scrape against each other. And that's how the male crickets sing. And one of the most famous singing crickets is the mole cricket. So the mole cricket is a very unusual looking cricket. It has a very large thorax, and it looks very hunchbacked, and its front legs are modified into claws. Yeah. So if you look at the front legs of this mole cricket, it's actually very similar to the legs of a mole, and that's why it gets its name. So they use it for the same function as well as for digging tunnels in the soil. And why the mole cricket needs to dig so well is because it actually uses the shape of its tunnel as an amplifier. So when you go to do sports, and then your PE teacher sometimes uses a megaphone to make his voice louder. Yeah, so that's what the mole cricket does. They actually dig their burrows in the shape of a trumpet, so that when they sing, it actually amplifies their song, and they can travel over many kilometers so that potential mates can hear them. Yeah. Okay, so the next group we'll be talking about are the leaf and stick insects. So like their namesake, these are insects that look like leaves and sticks. So this here is a stick insect. We have quite a few different species of stick insects in Singapore, and they all look like different parts of different plants. They're usually more commonly noticed when they are on a background that is not similar to what they look like. So this brown stick insect happened to be on a green leaf, and that's why it's easily spotted, right? But if, for example, a green stick insect, like the one on the right, is on a green leaf or on a plant with green stems, it makes them much harder to see. And so they avoid being eaten by predators. Yeah. So leaf insects are similar, except they mimic leaves instead of sticks, but they are all related to each other. Yeah. Okay, so this is a group that many people don't like. So cockroaches, mantises, and termites, they're all actually related to each other. So unlike the cockroaches we see at home, the cockroaches in the forest actually look quite different. Most of them actually mimic dead leaves. So like the top left-hand corner, this is an adult forest cockroach, and on the forest floor, it really looks like a dead leaf. Yeah, and they're very, very shy, so they usually don't try to fly at people. The one on the right that looks like a pill bug, this is actually a pill cockroach, a female pill cockroach. Yeah, so females of this species, they basically look like roly-polies, and they can roll into a ball to defend themselves. The males of this species actually look like a normal forest cockroach. Yeah. So this is also another example of what we call the sexual dimorphism, where the males and females look different. So in this case, the female doesn't even develop wings. She just uses her armored body as a defense mechanism. So she doesn't even fly. Yeah. And the bottom left-hand corner, we see a group of termites. So why termites are grouped with cockroaches is because they're actually closely related to each other. So people used to think that termites and ants were more closely related, right? So like we even call them white ants, for example, and because they live in colonies like ants, right? But it's been found out that the termites, which used to be a group on their own, are actually a type of cockroach that has kind of evolved to live together and feed more on wood than on other kinds of decaying matter. So they are a very specialized type of cockroach, and they evolve their social behavior differently from ants, yeah, separately. So most insects actually are not really able to digest wood very well, but termites have bacteria in their stomach that's specialized for breaking down hard plant matter like wood, like cellulose. Yeah. So these three Cockroaches and termites, we usually fear them in our homes, but the urban species that we encounter at home is actually quite different from the ones we find in the forest. So they don't overlap. The ones in the forest, they play very important roles in the ecosystem by helping to decompose decaying matter. So when leaves fall from the trees onto the forest floor, and when a tree falls and the trunk is on the ground, the termites and the cockroaches are the ones that help to break it down so that the nutrients in these tree trunks and the leaves can be returned into the soil and help to fertilize the younger plants and help them grow. Yeah, so they're actually very important in our forest ecosystems. So mantises are a special case. They are kind of like a specialized group of these cockroaches that have become carnivorous. So if you take a cockroach and you kind of like stretch it out a little bit and you give them knives for hands, yeah, so that's what a mantis is. They are almost strictly carnivorous, and they are usually active hunters. Some of them are ambush predators, where they try to mimic either other insects like ants, or they'll mimic like plant parts, so like flower mantises, in order to sneak up on their prey and then capture them using their knife-like forearms. Yeah. Okay. The next group is a group of insects known as the true bugs. So this is a bit confusing because usually when we use the term bugs, we refer to every kind of creepy crawly, like insects, spiders, scorpions, centipedes, all these we usually call bugs, right? But scientifically, the term bug actually refers to only one order of insects, which is this order. And they usually look very, very different as well. So it can be very, very confusing. So the one feature that all of these insects in this order have is that they have a long piercing mouthpart that they use for either feeding on plant sap or on the blood of other insects. Okay, I will talk about that soon. So the big mass on the leaf that you see here, these are cotton stainer bugs. Usually you'll see them congregate in mangroves, on sea hibiscus. And on the right side, you see some bugs that are a bit tricky. So the one on the top right looks a bit like a moth, but it's actually a true bug. And the one below it, that's a tree hopper, and there are these things called a helmet that have spines on it that perform many different functions. Some of them look more ornamental than others, but supposedly it helps prevent them from being swallowed by predators like birds. And also helps them mimic the thorns on the plants. So one more prominent group from the true bugs that you might have seen or more likely have heard is the cicada. So these are the ones that make the loud noises when you go into the forest during the daytime, right? So at night, then they are overtaken by the crickets instead. So cicadas, some of us may have heard of that they live for 13 or 17 years, like the brood X cicadas. But in tropical countries like Singapore, we actually do not experience this cycle of long life cicadas. So these are the 17-year cicadas are only found in temperate countries like Europe and the US, right? Because they have seasons and their larvae need to hibernate for long periods of time. So here they usually live shorter lifespans. And how they make the call is slightly different from crickets. So instead of rubbing their wings together, they actually have like a small drum-like organ in their thorax that they beat at very high frequencies. And they reach very, very loud volumes, almost the same volume as like a lawnmower and slightly less than a jet engine. Yeah. So they use this to call out to their mates and then try to find each other because they're so well camouflaged on the trunks. Then another group of bugs that are very, very specialized are the ones that you find in the water. So if you go to habitats that have ponds, sometimes like for example, Tampines Eco Green or like Lower Pierce Reservoir, right? And then you look in the water, sometimes you see bugs that are swimming in the water. So specialized for.
Sean Yap, is a water skater really an insect? It has 4 legs.
Okay, that's a very good question. If you look carefully, right, the one on the right is a pond skater. It looks like it has 4 legs, but if you look carefully near the head, right, there's actually 2 pairs of 2 legs that are holding on to its prey. Okay, so this is a carnivorous insect. The front legs actually look a bit like a mantis leg, and then it uses the middle legs and the back legs to walk on water. The front legs are used for hunting. Yeah. So in the end, in total, it still has 6 legs, and so it's an insect. Yep. Yeah. So the legs.
It's also called a water strider, right?
Yeah. So water
I believe
strider.
it can fly as well. Is it true that they can fly?
Yes. So adult pond skaters or water striders actually have wings and they can fly. So they use this to cross from pond to stream to reservoir, for example. Yeah, if they need to spread out. Yeah. So they're very light and their legs are very, very long. So it helps to spread their weight out across the surface of the water. And so it doesn't break the water tension, so they can stride or skate on the water. Yep. So these are a very unusual group of true bugs. So most true bugs actually use their mouth parts to feed on plant sap, but these are carnivores, right? So these are assassin bugs. And they adapt.
I thought that's antlion larva, right? Because it has those insects on its back.
Okay, the antlion larvae are the ones that live in cones in the ground at the bottom of the pit with the jaw sticking out. Yeah, so those are the antlion larvae. Yeah, this one that carries the bodies of ants on its back is an assassin bug. The one on the left also, the one that covers itself in wood shavings and detritus, that is also an assassin bug.
Why is that assassin bugs carrying bodies of ants?
Okay, very good question. So this photo is not very clear. It's my photo, but if you look at Mr. Nicky Bay's photo, you can very clearly see the outline of the actual assassin bug on the right side, and then the pile of ants on the left side, right? So why it carries ants on its back is for 2 reasons. One is for visual camouflage, so that it doesn't look like an insect. It just looks like a pile of dirt that's piled up together. And the other one is chemical camouflage. So ants actually give off a smell that they use to identify each other, and especially dead ants. So like when ants die, the other ants in the colony actually take them to an ant graveyard because they give off a certain smell or chemical that tells the ones around them that they are dead. So the assassin bug covers itself in ants so that it doesn't smell like an assassin bug to other ants. It smells like dead ants, right? So the ants don't notice the assassin bug sneaking up on it. And then every time it kills a new ant, it stacks one more body on its back. Yeah, that's how they work. It's quite sinister. Yeah.
But aren't there also other kinds of there are other kinds, I believe there are other kinds of assassin bugs. There are assassin bugs that actually drink blood, or other assassin bugs that are pollinator that fly to.
Okay, so the famous one that drinks blood is also known as the kissing bug, and it can actually spread diseases in other countries. But that particular species is not found in Singapore. Yeah.
Latin America, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Nice. Yeah. So assassin bugs are actually a pretty large group, and they actually have many different very, very specific prey and feeding styles. So there are, for example, the kinds that feed on termites. So they'll hide in a burrow and then they'll put out a dead body of a termite so the other termites will come to take it. And then when a new termite comes along to take the body, it will kill that termite and then leave it at the entrance instead. Right? And then there's also other assassin bugs that feed on spiders. So they can actually walk onto a spider's web. They can identify which part of the web is sticky and which part is not. And then they can infiltrate the web and then attack the spider in it. Yeah. Okay. So for flies, there are actually many, many different types of flies, not just house flies and mosquitoes. So the top left-hand one is a very common species that you might see in our forests. So this is a stilt-legged fly. Usually its 4 legs are held together and it's like always rubbing them, so it looks like it's washing its hands. And then the one on the top right is a robber fly. So the robber fly or the assassin fly, this group of flies are actually carnivorous and they feed on other insects as well. So they behave very, very similarly to dragonflies. So they also hunt other insects while flying around in the air. The one on the bottom left, this is a beetle fly. So it looks very, very much like a beetle, but it's actually a fly.
Yeah, it looks like a leaf beetle. Why does it have elytra?
Okay, so what looks like the wing covers of a beetle is actually an extension of the thorax. So it cannot open up. It's just used to cover the wings. And then when it wants to fly, it actually opens out the wings sideways, but then the top layer that looks like the elytra does not open up. Yeah. So that's the beetle fly. And then we have crane fly and signal fly. So one of my favorite groups of flies is the stalk-eyed flies. So if you go to areas that are a bit more muddy or near a water body, you might find these groups of flies. And what's special about them is that the males have usually very exaggeratedly long eye stalks. And what they use these for is they use this for basically seeing which male is better. So the males, they will compare the length of the eye stalks against each other and trying to find a female to mate with. And then the one with the longer eye stalks will scare off the one with the shorter eye stalks, basically. Yeah, so it's like comparing how buff they are, but using their eyes instead. So the interesting thing about this is that there is a limit to how long the eyes can grow, because beyond a certain length, it's no longer functional and the fly can't even see properly. So it's very hard to survive. Yeah, so it's a balance between finding mates and ability to survive. Okay, for butterflies and moths, I won't go into too much detail because there's so many species and they're all very pretty. But here are some of the more common species.
Lemon grass blues aren't very pretty, I'm gonna be honest with you. They are kind of dull.
Yeah. If you look at the top of the wings, actually.
It's a bit dark blue.
It's a metallic blue from a certain angle. Yep. So bottom left, you have the lime butterfly. This relatively common species you usually find, I think, more commonly during Chinese New Year when we have.
I also have a caterpillar that has crystallized and it's about to become a lime butterfly soon, I think.
Nice. Yeah, it's a green caterpillar, right? Yeah, that looks like caterpie. Yeah. So how do you tell butterfly from a moth? Usually, people will say things like butterflies rest with their wings up and moths rest with their wings down.
Can't you like look at the antennae? The moth's antennae is a bit furry.
Yeah. Okay. So you're right. In a sense that most of the other measures of how we determine what's a moth and a butterfly are a bit less reliable. But if you look at the antennae of the butterfly, you'll see that it's very narrow. And then at the end, there's like a little bulb or club, right? So this is usually a trait that is only seen in butterflies. Whereas for moths, their antennae are usually uniform. So they're either thin throughout or they are feathery. Yeah. So here are some examples of moths. So the colorful ones are the day flying moths. So not all moths are active at night as well.
The Madagascar sunset moth.
Sorry?
The Madagascar sunset moth, it flies around in the afternoon, but then it goes to sleep like evening or so.
Yep. The one at the bottom right, that is Oleander hawk moth.
Okay, sorry, can I request that we do not interrupt Sean, please, because we need to we only have 45 minutes and just let him finish his talk, then we can take your questions at the end. Okay, thank you.
All right. So earlier I mentioned that most moths are nocturnal and actually most butterflies are diurnals, meaning they're active during the day. And the reason for this is actually that so for most insects, by default, they're actually mostly nocturnal. So most insects are active at night. And then some groups like butterflies and bees, for example, are more active during the day. And the main reason for this is because usually the species that are active during the day are more reliant on flowers, for example, like for nectar. And they rely on color vision to see the flowers. So they need to be active during the daytime in order to see their landing zones, where they need to land on the flower petals, for example. Yeah. Okay, and then these butterflies They're a little bit special because their hind wings, the back wings, have little streamers coming out, and they actually use this as a defense mechanism. So when they feel like they're being threatened, they'll actually shake the little streamers that look like false antennae, with complete with eye spots, so that a predator like a bird might think that the head is on the tail end, and then they'll bite off the streamers, which actually will not hinder the survival of the butterfly, and the butterfly can fly off to live another day. Yeah. Okay, this is a relatively common moth that you might see in grassy areas. This is Webner's wasp moth.
I saw that at East Coast Park, the wasp moth.
Yeah, I think East Coast is a pretty good habitat for them because there's a lot of grassland. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can atlas moths be found in Singapore?
Yes. So this was found in Singapore. Some areas where they're more commonly seen are like Admiralty Park, but they are usually a bit more rare. So atlas moths are the largest moths in the world by wing area. So if you measure the area of the wings, it's actually the largest in the world. And they actually mimic snakes a little bit. If you look at the top left-hand corner of the wing, it actually has a little eye spot and it looks like the side profile of a cobra. So they use this to scare off birds. What's interesting about the atlas moth also is that for its size, it actually doesn't eat anything as an adult. So the caterpillars on the top left-hand corner is one of the largest caterpillars that you'll find in Singapore. They really just eat and non-stop basically until whatever plant they're on is almost out, runs out of leaves, right? So they do this to store all the energy that they need as an adult to fly around. Yeah, so the adults actually do not have functional mouthparts and do not feed. So they live for about 7 days to try and find a mate and then lay eggs. Yeah. Okay, so moving quickly on to bees, ants, and wasps. So not all bees are black and yellow. These are some common bees that are less typical. So they can come in red, they can come in blue, and most of them are actually brown or black. Yeah. So the common ones that we associate with the idea of what a bee is are the honeybees. And we usually know them for being social insects as well, but this is actually also not the default case for bees. Most bees are actually solitary. So honeybees are valuable to humans because they produce honey and they help to pollinate flowers, but actually most of the native plants are pollinated by other species of bees as well. So one of them is the carpenter bee. And if you're lucky enough, you might find the blue species of carpenter bee, which is the cerulean carpenter bee. So carpenter bees are more solitary, and they're called carpenter bees because they drill holes into wood where they make their burrows and where they lay their eggs and where their young grow up, right? And these are important pollinators of certain plants by buzz pollination. Yeah, so things like Simpoae or Dilenia, they are pollinated by these bees. Okay, for ants, many different kinds of species of ants also, but I'll just highlight a few. So these are trapjaw ants. And if you look at the picture on the right side, you can see kind of like two little hairs sticking out of the head in front of where the jaws are opened 180 degrees. So these are like trap jaws, like trigger hairs that work a bit like a Venus flytrap. So when it touches something like prey, the jaws automatically snap shut, kind of regardless of whether the ant wants it to or not. Yeah, but it does it so fast that it's very effective at capturing prey. Yeah, and sometimes they even use this snapping motion to jump from one place to another. Okay, this is the giant forest ant. If you go into our nature reserve areas, they are quite common. So they're one of the largest ant species in the world, and the largest individuals are about the size of my thumb. Yeah, like that. So they look very scary and very big, but they are actually quite docile. They don't usually bite people unless you really go and kacau them, you really go and disturb them. The ones that are a bit more aggressive are the weaver ants. So these ones you may have experienced if you have gone too close. They actually do bite and sting quite readily. What's interesting about them is the fact that they build their nests out of leaves, and to do this, they actually use their larvae. So they will hold their larvae that can produce silk in their mouths, and then they use it to stitch the leaves together with silk. Yeah, because when they become adults, they can no longer produce silk. So it's a bit like a silkworm larvae, except it's ants. Yeah. So they use this to make very complex structures out of leaves, and then the queen will hide inside, and then the rest of the nest is protected by the males. So they have a very strong teamwork. The workers, yeah. So wasps, so this here is a parasitoid wasp. If you look at its, so what looks like its tail is actually stabbing into the wood. So what it can do is it actually tap the wood to identify whether or not there is like beetle larvae inside the wood, and then it can drill a hole using its ovipositor. That's the term for what it uses to lay its eggs, and then it will lay an egg inside the beetle larvae. Yeah, so its young will grow up inside the larvae and then feed on it while it's still alive. So this is another wasp that you can see with its ovipositor out on the left side, and then on the right side you can see an image with its ovipositor stabbing into the wood. So there are also wasps that feed on, especially on spiders. So they are called hawk wasps or tarantula wasps. So these specialize in hunting large spiders, and they'll paralyze the spiders, and then usually they'll chew off the legs one by one and then bring the body back to a burrow where you'll lay its eggs on the spider's body, and then the young will hatch and then eat the prey alive. Yeah.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
I've heard that the tarantula hawk wasp, when they lay their eggs inside a male or female tarantula, the eggs will actually grow into that gender. Is that true? Say if it lays an egg in a male tarantula, the baby will also turn into a male, or if it lays an egg in a female, then the eggs will turn into a female. Is that true?
Sorry, so I have not heard of this phenomenon. So unfortunately, I'm not able to answer this specific question. Yeah, I'll check up on it after this. Okay, so the last group of insects that we'll quickly go through is the beetles. So beetles are the most diverse group of basically animals on the planet. There are more species of beetles than there are almost anything else. And because of that, they can come in many, many different shapes and forms. So what is a common trait among all beetles is the fact that they have, like what Jorel mentioned earlier, elytra, or Jorel, sorry. So the elytra is actually the hardened forewings of the beetles. So the front wings have hardened into a shell that protects the softer wings that they use to fly. Yeah, so you can see that in the image on the right side. So that was a ladybird, and ladybirds are beetles. So going very quickly over these, they can come in many different shapes and colors. Not shapes, but many different colors and patterns. So there are yellow ladybirds, red ladybirds with spots, black ladybirds without spots, even white ladybirds as well. So not all of them are spotted. And the one that is in the middle, this is actually the pupa of a ladybird. And the one at the bottom, this long thing, is actually the larva of a ladybird. Right. And on the right side, you see that this ladybird is actually competing with ants for access to the aphids, which are lower on the leaf. So most ladybirds are good for us because they feed on plant pests like aphids and mealybugs, right? And the ants actually protect these other aphids and mealybugs because they produce sugar for them that they usually can't get to on the leaves, right? So usually the ladybirds have to fight off the ants to get to the aphids. Yeah. So both the larvae and the adult feed on aphids, and it's quite important that we know what the larvae looks like because they kind of look like caterpillars. So in the garden, when we see them, right, sometimes gardeners, they don't know, they accidentally use pesticide on them and kill them instead, even though they are good for the garden. Yeah. So fireflies are beetles and not flies. So they are a very specialized group of beetles that are able to produce their own light, usually on the abdomen. And they use this to signal to members of the other sex to kind of like communicate, right? Yes.
Do they use bioluminescence or photophores?
This is actually a chemical reaction, so it can be considered bioluminescence. Yeah. So the interesting thing about them also is that the males, you can identify them because they have two bands that glow. Females only have one glowing band. Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
What is that? What is that covering on the head called?
It doesn't really have a very specific term for it. It's just the fact that the thorax kind of has extensions that go out to the side. So it forms like a hood-like structure. So you see this in other groups of insects like in cockroaches as well, where you can't really see the head because the thorax is covering it. Yeah. Good question though. Okay, tiger beetles quite common. Usually you will see them on forest paths or sometimes in the grass at the forest edge. So the cool thing about them is that they can run really, really fast. So
Yeah, the fastest insect, right?
yeah, on
In
land.
fact, I think they run so fast that you can't even see where they're going.
You are right. Okay, so they actually have to rely on their antennae more than their eyes when they're running, right? So there was an experiment where basically some mean scientists removed the antennae of the tiger beetle and then let them run around, and they started banging into everything because they actually use the antennae kind of like a walking stick to feel their surroundings as they move. Yeah. So they move so fast that their eyes can't even keep up, basically. Yeah. So if you run at the same pace as a tiger beetle, you'll be able to run about 50 meters in 1 second. Yeah. So in comparison, cheetahs, for example, are about 3 times slower relative to body size when you compare them with tiger beetles. Yeah. So the adults are very, very fast, but this is actually the larvae of the tiger beetle that actually don't really move at all. So it's a very different lifestyle. The larvae of the tiger beetle is actually an ambush predator. So they live in holes in the ground, and then the head of the tiger beetle is actually round, and it fits very nicely with the size of the burrow. So it looks like it's part of the ground. And then when an unsuspecting insect walks across, it will just grab the insect and then pull it into the burrow. Yeah. Okay, so this is a bombardier beetle. So these are beetles that have the ability to spray corrosive acid at very high temperatures as a defense mechanism. So this is an example of what that looks like. So it can aim its abdomen in all directions, and it can spray, and it's enough to blind like small mammals like dogs even. Yeah.
Where does
Sorry? Okay.
Are there also photosphorus beetles, also called fire beetles?
I think the previous name you mentioned is the genus of some of the bombardier beetles. Fire beetles, I'm not too sure. Might be a different group. Yep. So we also have rhinoceros beetles. So this is a common coconut palm rhino. They prefer to feed on palm trees or palm fruits. And this is what you call in Thailand the fighting beetle, or the Siamese rhinoceros beetle. Yeah, so these are one of the largest beetles you can find here, and they used to be very, very common. I think like our grandparents and all that would have caught them and have them fight each other, but now they are less common than before. Right. So they use their large horns to, males will have the larger horns and they will use them to fight with each other for access to females as well. So not all males are the same. Some of them are actually smaller and some males are larger, right? So you would think that most of the time the larger males are the ones that will win because they have bigger horns and they can use them to fight better. But in some species, the smaller males actually, they look more like females. So they will hide with the females, and then the larger males don't actually notice them, and then they will find their mates that way. So stag beetles are related to the rhino beetles, and they also use their large jaws for fighting, but structurally they're a bit different. So for rhino beetles, the horns are on top of the head and on the thorax, whereas for stag beetles, it's their jaws that they use for fighting, right? So for the rhino beetles, they have a more of a vertical motion with their horns, and then for the stag beetles, it's more of a horizontal motion with their jaws. Yeah, if you want to easily compare them, you can compare them with the Pokemon Pinsir and Heracross. Yeah. So lastly, why are insects important? So they perform many different functions, some of which I have talked about over the course of this presentation already. So for pollinators, we usually associate them more with bees and butterflies, but actually there are many other different insect groups that are important pollinators as well, including beetles, true bugs. On the top left-hand side, you can see Katydid. So there are grasshoppers and Katydids that feed on flowers, but at the same time, they help to pollinate them. And then seed bugs on the bottom left, and even moths on the right side. Yeah, many wasps are also important pollinators. So for decomposition, like I mentioned with termites earlier, there's also flesh flies that help to decompose poop and dead bodies, and dung beetles, right? So dung beetles are actually what I'm studying for my PhD right now, and they are a very interesting group. Most of the time they are living underground, so you don't usually see them unless you happen to find a fresh pile of poop, and then you might see them on top. Yeah. So most of them also have horns like rhino beetles that they use for fighting. And then we have one species in Singapore that is actually the one that rolls the ball into the dung into a ball, and then rolls them away from the dung pile. Yeah. So most of the species in Singapore that we have actually do not do this behavior, but we have one species that does. Yeah. So we usually call insects pests, but they actually help to control each other. So there are good insects and bad insects, for example, if you want to put it that way. So the example on the left, this is the emerald cockroach wasp. What it does is that it specifically hunts cockroaches, and it can brainwash them into following the wasp back to its burrow, and then you'll lay its eggs on it, and then the larvae will come out and eat them alive, like same as the previous examples. And then on the right side, you have a checkered beetle that's eating a bark beetle. So bark beetles, they actually drill a lot of holes into wood and can be bad for trees. But checkered beetles are predators, very specific predators of these beetles. So they help to control their populations. And lastly, one important function for insects is that they're actually food for other animals, unfortunately. So not good for the insect, but good for the ecosystem. So many other groups of animals rely on insects for food, including mammals like shrews, birds, amphibians like frogs and lizards. They all need insects to survive, and it's an important part of the food chain. Yeah. So here we have a spider feeding on a trumpet-tailed dragonfly, and a crab spider that has unfortunately gone for a honeybee, right? So then the crab spiders actually camouflage themselves in flowers and wait for bees to land, and then they will kill them and eat them. Okay, so I mean, pragmatically, they are important for all these reasons, but I like to think that, you know, as humans, we also appreciate insects for what they are. And I think lastly, this message is more for the parents. So if you, teach a child compassion for even the smallest life forms, I think that will go a long way. And with that, I think I've come to the end of the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Sean, for a very interesting talk. Okay, any questions anybody has? Okay, yeah, Ahmad, you want to ask the first question? Yeah.
Why do dragonflies don't breathe fire?
Why do they not breathe fire? Very good question. So, I don't think there are any insects that can do that. I think the closest we have is the bombardier beetle that can spray boiling acid. But dragonflies are not named for the ability to breathe fire, but rather their ability to fly and hunt prey in the air.
I believe they're called dragonflies because they eat almost everything, and they're kind of vicious. Yeah. They're like flying around killing everything like an assassin, and killing, like, it's basically a killing machine. When it's a pupa, it's already starting to eat snails and all, which is kind of creepy and it's scary. Yeah. So if you're a tadpole, do watch out.
I think L. Lim has a question.
Yes, Lim, yeah, would you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Are Pederus beetles true beetles?
Sorry, Pederus beetles.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so they are actually from a group or family of beetles called the rove beetles. So these are the ones that can cause blistering on the skin if you accidentally like smoosh them, because their blood or their hemolymph is actually kind of like poisonous to our skin and has a lot of compounds in it that causes our skin to react, right? So it's more of a defensive chemical that they've adapted, but then because they ended up in urban areas, then they become a bit of a health hazard for humans. Yeah, but they are true beetles. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, any more questions? You can type it in the chat box or you can ask your question like that.
Ahmad has another question.
Yeah, Ahmad.
Why is the insect on this picture crossing the road?
Oh, I think you're too young to understand the reference. So there's a band called the Beatles. I don't know whether you've heard of them. Yeah, one of the famous album covers is of the four band members crossing the road. Yeah.
It's quite old, right? Like the 1900s or something like that. Like around
Did wasps evolve from these?
Sorry?
Did wasps evolve from these?
Okay, the wasps evolved from bees. I would say it's actually the other way around. So ants and bees are kind of like specialized social wasps in a sense. Bees, I mean, are more separate from the wasps actually. Ants are more closely related to wasps. And then if you want to talk about hornets, they're also a more specialized type wasp. Yeah.
Okay.
So they all evolved from wasps? Kind of thing.
They evolved from a common ancestor. So before we called them bees and wasps, there was another insect, right? And then that's what split into bees and wasps, and then ants kind of branched out from wasps. Yeah.
Okay, so I have two questions here. Where can we find fireflies in Singapore?
Okay. Unfortunately, most of the areas that they are found in are not accessible at night, so it's quite hard to see them. The one place that is a bit more accessible and more reliable is actually Pasir Ris mangroves. So that's one of the few nature areas that is open to public at night. And also they are doing a reintroduction program there. So there's a higher chance of seeing fireflies if you go to that area. Yeah.
And how about dung beetles? Where do you find them?
Okay, dung beetles are a bit tough because usually they don't come to the surface of the soil unless there is dung on the surface. So it's really luck dependent. You can follow monkeys or squirrels around, or even or look for wild boar dung, and then or even dog poop also. Yeah, and then sometimes you will see the dung beetles on there. Yeah.
Somebody's asking that she's been keeping the grub of a rhinoceros beetle for 3 months. How long more will it become the actual adult?
Okay, it is dependent on the species and also how much space and like the wood shavings you're giving the grub. Usually it's the life cycle of a rhino beetle can be up to a year. Yeah, so it can take quite a long time for them to develop. So if it goes for about 6 months, sometimes depending on the species. Yeah, that's a larvae.
Okay.
So you might have to wait another 3 months and then see how it goes. If not, you might need to provide it a bigger tank. Yeah. Wood lice bugs. Okay, good question. So we call them bugs because in general, anything that is segmented and has many legs, we call bugs, right? But in terms of, yeah, scientifically, they're actually crustaceans. So they're more closely related to crabs than they are to insects or millipedes or anything like that. Yeah. Isopods are also, yeah, isopods are crustaceans.
So they are decapods, the wood lice.
Oh, they're not decapods. So decapods and isopods are both under crustacea. So they're related to each other. Decapods refers specifically to like crabs. And then yeah, then things like lobsters and yeah, and isopods, they're all under crustacea together with crabs. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the other interesting fact here is the fact that crustaceans, like crabs and isopods that you mentioned, are actually the sister taxa to insects. So when you look across the many different types of so-called bugs, right? usually people think that insects and spiders are closely related, but they're actually quite distant. Insects are most closely related to crustaceans. Yeah.
So can I ask for carpenter B, right? What do they use to drill the holes in the wood? Do they have a drilling mouth parts or something?
They have the mouth part is a bit different from, like, for example, for a honeybee, it's like hardened, and they can use that to like chew through the wood.
Or it's
basically.
chewing, is it? It's a chewing action.
Yeah, it's not really drilling in a sense.
Oh, it's chewing.
Yeah, it's not the same as the ovipositor drilling. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So when insects are rubbing their legs together, what are they actually doing?
So mostly they are cleaning themselves, actually, or preening. So for some insects, the legs are actually very important sensory parts. So they need to keep them clean most of the time. So for example, like the flies that I mentioned earlier, and you will see that even in cockroaches. Cockroaches actually clean themselves very often. Yeah, they're one of the so-called cleaner insects on the surface. Yeah.
Although they're not regarded so, okay.
Okay, I think we have a bit more hands raised.
Yes, I can go ahead and ask your question, please. Lim. I think maybe that was a false signal.
Okay, who eats Federis beetles?
To change.
Very few things can eat them. But I think usually there might be some amphibians that are actually immune to the poison that help to eat them. Yeah.
Hello, Sean.
Yeah.
Do I need to change tank?
Oh, I can't really see. Setup.
Hello,
Oh.
Sean. Do I need to change my grub's tank?
I think that looks quite large. I think you should be fine for most species. Yeah, it does need to be a bit more patient.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions, anybody?
What is bombardier beetles? Okay. Also not many things, but there are some small mammals, for example, that are able to quickly bite the head off the beetle before the beetle can react. Yeah. So I think in certain countries there are like meerkats or mongooses that can do that quite easily. Yeah.
The bombardier beetle.
Yeah.
No. No, Kitty got the No, I'm not anything outside.
Okay, I think, okay.
Not only the bombardier beetle.
Okay, guys, any more questions? If not, then we have
Thank
come
you
to the
very
end of the
much.
talk. Okay, thanks a lot, sir.
Okay,
And thanks, kids, for attending. Okay.
ask already. You want to ask?
Honey ants, actual ants.
Honeypot ants? Yeah, they're ants. Yeah. They just have a special adaptation that allows them to store a lot of honey. But they're real ants, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that they suck the honey that's actually inside the other end. So it's like a bit funny because it looks like a giant balloon.
Yeah, and in some places people
I think I thought the only insects that kampung children love to play with, like the spider they catch and then make them fight. I didn't know there were like rhinoceros beetles they catch also.
yeah, last time they used to do that. In fact, if you go to places where they are still common, like in Thailand, it's actually quite a popular so-called pastime. Yeah. All right.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Bye-bye.
It's been really, really entertaining and educational. Thank you.